The candles were still burning. The food was still warm. Every seat at the table empty. The servant stood in the doorway, breathing hard from running house to house across the city. He looked at his master. His master looked at the table. "Nobody came, sir." The host said nothing. He just stood there. Have you ever planned something, really planned it, and watched people find reasons not to show up? Not strangers, people you invited, people who said yes. Or flip it. Have you ever been the one with the excuse? The one who had something important, something reasonable, something that made complete sense at the time, and said no to something that turned out to matter more than you realized? We are going to spend the next 25 minutes inside a dinner party that nobody attended. Before we get there, I want to ask you something about the word busy and what it actually means when we use it. First century Galilee ran on honor, not money, not law, honor. And in that world, every social interaction was a transaction, a deposit, or a withdrawal from a man's public reputation. When a wealthy man threw a banquet, he didn't just send one invitation, he sent two. The first came days or even weeks before the event, a formal notice. "I am hosting a feast. Will you attend?" And you said yes. That was the agreement. That was your word. Then, on the day of the feast, when the animals had been slaughtered, when the bread had been baked, when the wine had been opened, and the tables had been set, he sent a second message. "Everything is ready. Come now." That second message was not a reminder. It was a summons. You had already committed. Preparing a feast of this scale took weeks. The host would have purchased the finest cuts of meat. Cooks would have worked through the night. The courtyard would have been cleared and covered with linen. Servants would have been hired, oil lamps filled, cushions arranged. The smell of roasting meat would have drifted into the street 2 days before the guests arrived. The guests who were invited were not strangers. They were the inner circle, landowners, merchants, men of standing. These were the people whose presence at your table said something about who you were. Their attendance was part of the feast itself. In this culture, refusing the second summons after you had already said yes was not simply rude. It was an act of social aggression. It was the equivalent of publicly humiliating the host. It said, "Your table is not worth my time. Your honor does not obligate me. I have better things." And yet, one man said he had just bought a field. Another said he had just bought 5 yoke of oxen. A third said he had just gotten married. 3 different men, 3 different reasons, all of them sent after they had already committed. 3 messages came back to the host that afternoon. 3 versions of the same word, no. The first man had just bought a field. He needed to go see it, he said. This sounds reasonable. Land was wealth. Land was security. Land was the thing you passed to your sons. Of course, he needed to go see it. But here is what does not fit. He had already bought it. The transaction was done. The field wasn't going anywhere. What exactly did he need to verify that afternoon, at the same hour as the feast, that could not wait until morning? Something in him had decided the field was more urgent than the table. He told himself it was about the land, but it was about something else. Control, maybe. The need to feel like he was managing his own life, his own assets, on his own schedule. The second man had just bought 5 yoke of oxen, 10 animals, a significant investment. He needed to test them, he said, to make sure they worked as promised. Again, reasonable. Agricultural equipment was not cheap. A bad purchase could ruin a season. But oxen don't get tested at sundown. You test oxen at dawn, in a field, with daylight. The timing didn't add up. He wasn't testing oxen. He was proving something, to himself or to someone else. He was a man who made large purchases and needed to be seen managing them. The feast could wait. His pride couldn't. The third man said he had just gotten married. Under Jewish law, a newly married man was actually exempt from certain civic duties for a full year. He had a case, a real one. And yet, the invitation had come before the wedding. He had said yes before she was his wife. Somewhere between yes and now, she had become the reason not to go. The servant stood at each door, polite, formal, repeating the same words. The master says everything is ready. Please come now. And each man gave his answer, looking slightly past him, already thinking about the next thing. 3 men, 3 lives moving in 3 directions. None of them angry at the host, none of them cruel, just occupied, pointed somewhere else. And each one, in the moment of saying no, felt entirely justified. The servant walked back through the city with 3 excuses in his hands and delivered them to the man whose table was still warm. The host heard the 3rd excuse, and something shifted. The text says he became angry, but this is not the anger of a man who got what he expected. This is the anger of a man who realizes something he didn't want to know. He had built the feast around these people. He had made his guest list, sent his invitations, received his confirmations. He had planned the seating. He had imagined the conversations. And now the room was empty, and the food was getting cold, and the 3 men he had honored with an invitation were somewhere else. A field, a barn, a bedroom, living lives that did not include him. He said to his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the city. Bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame." This was not charity, or not only charity. This was a pivot. The host was not canceling the feast. He was redirecting it. He was opening the table to the people his original guests would never have sat next to. People who ate in alleys, people who begged at the temple gate, people whose invitations never came. The servant went, and he came back, and still there was room. So the host sent him out again, this time beyond the city walls, into the country roads, the hedgerows, the places where people slept in the open air. Compel them to come in, he said. Not threaten, not force. Compel, urge, insist, persuade. I want my house to be full. And here is the thing the original 3 guests would not know until later, if they ever knew at all. Their seats were taken. The places at the table with their names attached, gone. Filled by people who came in from the road with dust on their feet and calluses on their hands, who had never expected to sit at a table like this, who had no business being there by any social calculation, and who came anyway, because someone asked. The host had said something else, quietly, almost to himself. Not one of those men who were invited will taste my banquet. That sentence was not a punishment. It was just the shape of the truth. If you are not at the table, you are not at the table. The table was full. That is where the story ends. Not with justice, not with resolution. With a full table and 3 empty chairs somewhere in the city, chairs the guests themselves had chosen. Go back to that opening image, the candles burning, the food warm, the servant in the doorway. Nobody came, sir. That moment is not the tragedy of the story. That moment is the pivot. Because what came after it was not grief. It was a door swinging open wider than it had ever been planned to open. Now, look at the people who walked through that door. A man with no legs who had to be carried. A woman who had not eaten a real meal in 3 days. A teenager who slept under the market stalls. They had nothing to offer the host. No social currency. No reciprocal invitation. No future favor. They came because they were told there was food. And they came because the word compel meant someone actually meant it. This is where the story turns sharp, because Jesus told this parable to a group of people eating a meal at a Pharisee's house, people who had been invited and had come, and as they listened, some of them would have recognized themselves in the original guests. People with fields, people with oxen, people with new marriages and new priorities, and the comfortable certainty that there would always be another invitation. The deeper question is not why those 3 men said no. The deeper question is what they said yes to instead. The man with the field said yes to his land over his relationship with the host. The man with the oxen said yes to his investment over his word. The man with the new wife said yes to his domestic comfort over his prior commitment. None of those yeses were wrong in themselves, but every yes is also a no to something else. That is the hidden architecture of every excuse. When you say, "I'm busy," you are not describing your schedule. You are revealing your priorities. You are telling the world and yourself what you chose over what. The word busy in modern English has become almost meaningless through overuse. But strip it back and it means this other thing matters more to me right now. That is not a bad thing. That is just the truth. The problem is when we do not admit it to ourselves, when we dress the choice in the language of obligation and pretend the decision was made for us. The first man didn't have to go to his field that afternoon. He chose to. The second man didn't have to test his oxen at that hour. He chose to. The third man didn't have to stay home. He chose to. And each one called his choice a reason. From the dawn of time, mortals have grappled with purpose. Hear this truth. What does your reason look like? What is the thing you keep almost doing, almost attending, almost saying yes to, and then finding a very good explanation for why not today? And the feast did not wait for them. That is the part of this story that sits uncomfortably. We want the host to try again, to send another message, to hold a seat. But the text does not give us that. The servant goes out, the table fills, the latecomers arrive. The door closes, not in anger, but in the simple logic of a table that has only so many seats, and a host who decided the feast would happen regardless. And there is something in the host that is worth looking at closely. He is angry, yes, but he does not stop. He does not mourn the guest list. He does not send a final message to the three men explaining what they missed. He just says, "Go further. Bring more. I want this house full." There is a kind of grief in that sentence, but also a kind of freedom. He is not defined by who refused him. He is not shrunk by the rejection. The feast was not about the original guests. The feast was always about the feast. And the people who came in from the roads and the hedgerows, who had never in their lives expected a summons like this, they sat down at a table that was never designed for them, and ate a meal that cost them nothing. They didn't earn the seat. They didn't deserve it by any social measure. They just came when someone told them to come. That is the twist. The people who had every reason to be there, every credential, every prior commitment, every formal invitation, were not there. And the people who had no reason to expect anything sat down and ate. And the candles burned. The food was warm. The table was full. Just not with the people anyone expected. And the host, standing at the end of the table, looking at these faces he had never planned to see, did not look like a man who had lost something. He looked like a man who had found out what his feast was actually for. In 2012, a writer named Tim Kreider published an essay in the New York Times called The Busy Trap. It went viral almost immediately because it said something people recognized but hadn't been willing to say out loud. Kreider wrote, "Busyness serves as a kind of existential reassurance, a hedge against emptiness. Obviously, your life cannot possibly be silly or trivial or meaningless if you are so busy, completely booked, in demand every hour of the day." He was not talking about people who were genuinely overwhelmed. He was talking about people who had chosen to be busy, who had constructed a life of constant motion as a shield against having to decide what actually mattered. Around the same time, researchers at Harvard Business School were studying what they called the busy signal, the social phenomenon where people who describe themselves as busy are perceived as higher status, more important, more successful. Being busy had become a brand. And once something becomes a brand, people perform it, even when they do not need to. Think about the last time someone asked you how you were doing. How many people said, "Busy"? How many said it with a slight note of pride? And how many of those people, if you had pressed them, could actually tell you what they were so busy doing, and whether any of it was what they most wanted to be doing? The three men in this story were not lazy, they were not indifferent, they were occupied. They had full lives, real investments, genuine relationships, but their fullness left no room. And the tragedy is not that they were busy. The tragedy is that they called their choices reasons, and therefore never had to own them. Here is a specific scenario. A man works in finance. Long hours, high stakes, genuinely important work. His daughter turns 8. Her birthday falls on a Thursday when there is a major client dinner he has known about for weeks. He tells his wife, "I'll make it up to her this weekend." And he means it. He is not a villain. He is a man with a field and 5 yoke of oxen and the conviction that there will always be another invitation. But here is what his daughter hears. Not his schedule, not his reasoning. She hears, "The dinner was more important than me." She may never say that out loud. She may tell herself he is busy, he works hard, it is fine. But something lands, something that does not fully lift. Behold, who is at your table right now that you keep meaning to truly show up for? What is the feast you keep almost attending, the conversation you almost have, the relationship you almost invest in, the version of your life you almost live? And what is the excuse that keeps feeling reasonable? The research on regret is remarkably consistent. Studies going back to the 1990s, including landmark work by psychologists Tom Gilovich and Victoria Medvec, found that people regret their inactions far more than their actions. The things they didn't do, the invitations they didn't accept, the tables they didn't sit at. The field could wait, The oxen would still be there in the morning. The marriage, the real feast of the marriage, happened at a table, not a barn. The feast in this story is still happening. That is the thing this parable refuses to let go of. The host did not shut the doors and go to bed angry. He sent his servant out again, further, wider, into places where people had given up expecting anything. Compel them to come in, he said. I want the house full. The invitation is still moving outward. The table is still being set. There is a version of your life where you stop letting the field, the oxen, the comfortable routine become the permanent excuse. Where you look at the invitation in your hand, whatever form it takes, and you say yes before you talk yourself out of it. The people from the roads and the hedgerows came because someone insisted. Someone showed up at the place where they had stopped expecting good things and said, "There is a table. There is room. Come now." And they came, dust on their feet and calluses on their hands, and no idea what they were walking into. And they sat down. The candles burned all night. The table was full. Somewhere across the city, 3 men were exactly where they had chosen to be, and they never tasted what had been prepared for them. Not because they were punished, because they were somewhere else. What is the feast you keep almost attending? What is the yes you keep almost saying? The invitation is still out, the table is still set, and the servant is still moving through the streets, further and further out, looking for anyone willing to come.